Good afternoon. Welcome to the ION Toronto event happening here. Thank you all for coming in. I realize this is a holiday for many of you here, so thank you for joining us at this event. My name is Dan York. I am with the Internet Society as part of the Deploy360 program, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But before we begin, I just want to talk a bit about the agenda for what we're doing today. So, obviously, I'm starting out here at the beginning with a few opening remarks and a little bit about the program, the Internet Society Deploy360 program that's behind this effort. I'll be followed by Glenn McKnight, who's going to give a little bit of an update on the Internet Society chapter in Canada. You may or may not be even aware there is one, but Glenn's going to talk about that and the efforts that have been underway to help create a presence for an organization focused around well, I'll leave it to Glenn to talk about what all he's going to be doing in a few minutes rather than doing that. Following that, we'll have Jim Galvin up here to talk about why implement DNSSEC. Let me ask a question. How many of you are familiar with DNSSEC? All right, good. Good number of hands. A few people in there don't count because they're speakers or others, but good to, or designers of DNSSEC tools. But it's great to see that. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it means and why people should care. Then Tim Winters, he's going to be followed by Jacques Latour, who is going to give an illustration of what CIRA did with .ca to go and sign in with DNSSEC and talk a bit about where that's going. And then Tim Winters is going to follow with an update on where we are with IPv6 deployment globally and how that's working. We'll have a break from 2:30 to 2:50. And then after that, I'm going to be back up to talk a little bit about the IETF 88 meeting that happened last week in Vancouver. And then my colleague Jan Zors will be up to talk about best current operational practices and some efforts we're looking at about how we're helping capture some of the best practices that you all have as ISPs and network operators and sharing them with other people and how you can learn perhaps from some of the efforts going on in other parts of the world and looking at how do we capture some of those best practices that very often are just shared in hallways or at events like this, but how do we share those to a wider audience? Then at 3:20, we'll be wrapping up with a great panel that Paul Anderson will be coordinating right here about, he'll be moderating about routing, whichever you wish to call it, on the resiliency and security of how we make the internet routing infrastructure that much stronger and more secure. And we've got some great panelists to be part of that. It'll be a good thing. Throughout this, we're going to be actually asking for your time for questions as well, so we'll encourage you to do that. Then I'll come back at a closing to talk a little bit about an iPad raffle, and more on that in a moment. This is being streamed live, so we will ask you, if you're asking a question, to please speak to the microphone because we are sending this out across YouTube Live. Streaming out over IPv6, by the way. It will go out that way over YouTube Live. And then we're going to conclude at 4:30, where we'll go right into the welcome reception for the Canadian ISP Summit. We would like to thank Affilius, who is our sponsor for this. And let's give a round of applause to Affilius. Bringing you all here, getting the facility, all of the pieces, the food, everything that is part of this does take a good amount of money in addition to everything else. So we appreciate Affilius coming to the table to help with that and do that. We also, being the Internet Society, would of course like to thank the Canadian ISP Summit for providing a venue and working with us to allow us to do this ION conference here. So yes, thank you, Paul, and all the organizers. So there is going to be a drawing at the end, and you all should have received in your bag, correct, is where it is there's a little flyer in there. And if you fill it out, it will have a form, and at the end, we're going to pull one of those, and we do have a freshly purchased iPad mini, very freshly purchased. So that will be going to somebody who is here, the lucky winner who stays on to the end. So with that, I want to just say a few words about the Internet Society's Deploy360 program, of which I am a part. It is part of a program that we call the Deployment and Operationalization Team. It's myself, Megan Cruz, who's sitting here in the front, Jan Zors, who's here, and also Chris Grundeman, who sends his apologies, but he was unable to be here today. But our focus is around how we can help accelerate the deployment of protocols that have been developed in the IETF and other areas. So we look at what are some of these open standards and how can we accelerate their deployment to get them out there in a larger way. As you can see, the IETF does create these protocols, but sometimes they take a long time, like, well, IPv6, for instance. And so part of what we're looking at is how do we help? We were here 2 years ago. How many of you were here 2 years ago when we were talking? Okay, a few people who are here. And in that time, since those 2 years, we've heard a lot of great feedback from people about what resources they need. We've been building out our website to add more of these resources so that people can learn a bit more and understand how we can go and get these deployed. We have 4 different components of what we do. Part of it is our web portal at internetsociety.org/deploy360, where we have this technical documents. We actually just put one up this morning about a deployment guide for DNSSEC for internet service providers, something that's been in the works for a little while. We also have an active program in social media. We do speaking engagements, and we do these ION conferences, and more on that in a minute. Our portal that we have content there focused for network operators, for content providers, a number of different people. Our 3 main themes right now are IPv6, DNSSEC, and what we call routing resiliency and security. It's not as specific around specific protocols, but it is talking more about how do we make the routing infrastructure more resilient and secure. We also have a very active blog. I mentioned this slide in part to say there's 3 parts to our site. One is we have these resources that we've been accumulating and writing and curating, finding them or adding them. We also have a very active blog where we're constantly updating it with news and items about new IPv6, DNSSEC, or routing pieces that are there. And you could subscribe to it and do all the typical things to keep up with that's there. And then we also have these ION conferences that are part of what we do. On social media, we're very active. How many of you follow us on social media? Okay, a number of folks. You can follow us. We're easy to find. We're usually Deploy360 on pretty much every service that's out there in some way. And we are constantly, again, putting out more information about IPv6, DNSSEC, or routing. This is the 3rd of our ION conferences this year. We had one earlier, much earlier in the year in Singapore. We had another one in Krakow, Poland, just in September. And then we have this one. We've had other ones around the world. We're going out and talking to network operators like yourself and trying to understand what are your needs. And so part of why I'm up here saying this is that I would like to hear, the 3 of us who are here would like to hear from you. What are your barriers? What are the problems you're having with getting IPv6 or DNSSEC? What are they and how can we help you? How can we take away some of those issues that are there? We speak around the world at various different events that are going on. We have what are called content roadmaps, and I don't expect you to necessarily look at this full thing here except to mention that there is something called our roadmaps up there, and we'd love to see you take a look at those and say, are there materials on here that you want to find? We're also interested in finding, we're not out here to create all this ourselves. In some cases, we've found some really good materials that people have created, and we point to those. So if you look at our roadmaps and you say, oh, they're looking for a tutorial about how to do IPv6 in a data center, and you wrote one up for your own internal usage or for some people in your area, hey, let us know, because we'd like to share that and get that information out there to the world. A large part of what we're focused on is how do we find that information and share that. So we're growing the site. We're adding more content to it. Our next several months, we're looking to try to fill out the roadmaps that we've defined. We're also always looking for more ideas of what you could need to use. We're going to be looking at adding some more content in additional languages that are out there and going on from there. We do really want to get your feedback. You can go to our site. There's a link on there for feedback where you can just tell us what you need, what you're looking for. We also have our email, which is deploy360@isoc.org, and you can get to us very easily.